This week, we welcome back Zane, Lackey, Chief Security Officer at Signal Sciences, to talk about the effects of COVID-19 on web applications. Turns out they're not immune or anyway. In our second segment, we welcome back Sumed Takar, President and Chief Product Officer at Qualys, to discuss the power of the cloud platform, one single agent, one global view. In the security news, vulnerable cellular routers targeted in the latest attacks on Israeli water facilities. Fugitive Wirecard executive Jan Marlesek was involved in an attempt to purchase hacking team spyware. 8 cybersecurity themes to expect at Black Hat USA, and one that I really like and glad it made the list, albeit last. Twitter hackers viewed 36 private messages and accounts, and how thieves are emptying ATMs from a new jackpotting attack. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/Security Weekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is flat networks inside the cloud and data center that allow threats to move laterally and compromise vulnerable targets. But microsegmentation using traditional firewalls is too complex and time-consuming. There's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation. Using the identity of machines and software that are communicating, Edgewise offers the strongest protection that adapts automatically to changes. Protect any application in any cloud without any changes to your network by visiting securityweekly.com/Edgewise.
Just use the salve and the burning will stop in 4 to 5 days. Oh, hi. This week on Advanced Sexual Positions, our guest claims he can do a double vanilla fudgy ripple. And that guest would be Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 659, recorded on July 23rd, 2020, right here in G-Unit Studios, where Dr. Doug White is to my left. Welcome, Dr. Doug.
I am. I'm to
Were
the
you
left.
giving professional medical advice?
I was.
You're not a medical doctor.
I'm not a doctor, but I play one on television.
In fact, you do. On the lines remotely, Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us with the lava lamp. It's a lovely...
It's definitely a lava lamp. Dr. Doug and my lava lamp have a few things to say about the red burn.
Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us from some outdoor location.
Or I figured out how to use the background setting on Skype.
Oh, he did a good job. Nice.
And technically, I think I'm to your right.
Maybe. You're more...
That's the crypto wall at NSA, right?
Yeah, the NSA
No,
crypto
this is
wall.
the crypto statue in the courtyard of CIA
Oh, the
headquarters
CIA,
in Langley,
yeah, that's
Virginia.
right.
Yes.
Notice it says crypto's kind of off to the side of my head there.
Very
That's
nice.
your
Very nice. Mr. Lee Neely is here with us. Lee, welcome.
Good to be here. Nice, beautiful Thursday evening. Ready to have some fun.
Absolutely. Quick announcement before we dive into it. Do you have a guest in mind or a topic you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests. Complete the form. We review those on a regular basis and will reach out to you. Of course, no stranger to Security Weekly. Zane Lackey is the co-founder and chief security officer at Signal Sciences and the author of Building a Modern Security Program by O'Reilly Media, which that book is actually in my bathroom. He serves on multiple public and private advisory boards and is an investor in emerging cybersecurity companies. You can learn more about Signal Sciences by going to securityweekly.com/Signal Sciences. Zane, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. And the bathroom, really a great spot for that book anyway.
Right?
That's perfect location.
Yes, absolutely. That's where I do a lot of my reading. So Zane, so you're at home, which is amazing because you're like a world traveler.
I'm at home. American Airlines is very sad about that fact.
Right?
I have to assume. I realized this has been the longest 5-month stretch that I have been at home in probably 7-8 years. At this point.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing to think about what some of the effects are of COVID-19, right? We'll talk a little bit about what we're doing with our web applications, but just not traveling and the effects that has on us personally, right? Because for as long as I've known you, Zane, you've always been in like undisclosed locations, just coming off red eyes and like stuff like that all the time.
Exactly.
So it's so weird to like talk to you and not like have you say, oh yeah, like I just got back from Tokyo.
Yeah, I think my record was last year's RSA where I got a double red eye and then into RSA that Monday morning. Which,
I remember that.
That was special.
Yeah, you look a lot more refreshed now than you did when I saw you after that.
I feel much more refreshed.
I bet. So Zane, you've been on this on the show before, so we just want to dive right into the topic. And you said something really interesting to me, and it's interesting how where a lot of the behaviors are changing, and one of the behaviors you're observing, which absolutely, I mean, it frightens us a little bit, I think, is that people are taking their web applications that largely lived in the internal network on premise, and they're putting them up in the cloud or making them publicly accessible. Usually, even in my experience, right, that goes wrong because, right, actually we did that and left the Docker API exposed, and someone uploaded a container and did a DDoS attack, right? Like, because we were in that emergency situation of going, I need to take this web app and I need to put it in the cloud. Now, in our case, it was hardware failure, right? But now it's for accessibility. And how is that working out for folks, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the thing that we've seen kind of across the both industry and the customer base there's been kind of two effects on COVID-19 on apps and APIs and things like that. One is the thing that you would just completely expect, which is some of those, their usage went through the roof, 10x, 100x basically overnight, or other ones where their usage went to basically zero overnight. And I think that's kind of the straightforward one that even though it's a surprise, it wasn't something that really shocked people. The one that kind of caught everyone off guard is for all of these major enterprises, you have a ton of business critical applications that have historically lived inside the corporate environment. And so, you always, as a CISO, you always thought about, okay, I've got my external facing apps or my external facing APIs. Okay, I've got my layer of protection for them, or I don't because I haven't gotten to it yet. But they're built to be external facing. So I at least, we can all make a lot of jokes about the security of applications and everything. But I think, for the ones that were designed from day one to be external facing, they're at least in kind of one tier of security posture.
Right. They've had a security scan at some point, right?
There was something done from a security perspective right along the way. But, you really want to have a scared look on a CISO's face, like ask them about what their internal apps likely look like. And I think for any of us that have been security practitioners, that the internal facing apps always had a very different security profile, right?
Well, agreed, because
typo.
Right, Zane, if you take an internal or take an app and you put it on the internet, now, I mean, to go back to the quote like almost 15 years ago on the show, and I think it was Dan Kaminsky or Dan Gear, one of the Dans, right, said you're only 5 milliseconds away from every attacker in the world, right?
Yeah.
But your apps that are exposed to the internet have been that way for a while. So if you didn't scan it before it went on there, it got scanned.
Exactly.
And if you didn't detect that right away, you detected some kind of compromise, right?
My favorite quote that I've always gotten to say on that is, if you're on the internet, you get a pen test for free already. You just don't get the report.
Right.
And that's exactly the case with those kind of external facing apps. I think what changed in COVID, and that really caught a lot of folks off guard, was that for the business to function as suddenly people overnight started working from home that had never worked from home, is a lot of enterprises had to make those applications externally reachable. And they didn't have.
Did you just lose audio?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did too.
Oh. Yeah.
Oh, man.
We just dropped.
Oh, he's back. Sorry, Zane.
External access. Excuse me, my Wi-Fi froze for a second, I think.
Yeah.
you saw them have to enable external access to those previously internal applications. And so it was like, the HR app that the HR team only ever used internally, suddenly that's internet facing, and it's 5 milliseconds away from every attack.
Right. And that typically doesn't happen overnight, right? Like typically the way I have dealt with that being, IT person throughout my career is if people need to go work from home for a day or two and even a week, those internal apps, like after a week, I may get can you poke a hole in the firewall? And I'm like, no, can't do that. Like, you'll be in on Monday. It's good, right? But with COVID, everyone's working from home for not just weeks, but like months, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I can really see being in the shoes of an IT person. You going, we really need to get this app up in the cloud.
We saw a bunch of customers come to us and say, these apps that contain employee or customer data are suddenly internet accessible. We need you to help us protect those immediately. And we saw a whole spike of that. We saw a spike in kind of March and then a continued conversation on that as this has been impacting more and more enterprises.
And that's really, it speaks to the ease of deployment too, right?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, in our case, they were able to just either drop something in and get that coverage or make a DNS change and not change anything about the infrastructure at all and get that coverage entirely.
Yeah, that's important. I mean, I've implemented the Signal Sciences product, and it's really easy to put it inside the app. Yeah, it's like
what layers is that protecting at?
Sorry?
What layers is that protecting at?
So layer 7, what we really focused on was, there's always been a lot of products that kind of try to claim to do everything at every layer. And, as our background as practitioners, that always really frustrated us. I kind of want the Unix model, right? Of give me a tool that does one thing and does it very well. And that's really what we did with Signal Sciences is we made a product that defends layer 7. So the web app and API layer, and does that very well. But we don't try to go down into, container kernel exploits or something like that. Like we focus on the layer that we're really passionate about and really, very focused at, and that's what we help our customers protect.
So does that also mean that the product allows you can combine it with multiple products, something like a WAF, or you're leveraging some microsegmentation on the inside as well as what's being faced externally? Do those play nice together?
Well, it's a great question, Tyler. Yeah, Zane, I've seen what it can detect. How does it trigger something to block attacks?
Yeah, so this is where it plays really nicely with the rest of the tool chain. And I'll tell you from putting my CISO hat back on, this is where, I don't need another vendor telling me that they've got a single pane of glass. Like I don't need another single pane of glass. I need a tool that's going to integrate with the rest of my tool chain. And so this is what we see with a lot of customers is that they'll deploy Signal Sciences to protect their apps or their APIs, and they'll integrate it with the rest of, Splunk if they're doing that for SIM, or the rest of their, microsegmentation, or Slack or Jira or PagerDuty, or any of the sort of services that they're using, so that we integrate with everything else there, and they're getting that visibility through not only our dashboards and analytics and everything, but the rest of their tool chain as well. And then to the previous part of your question there, like WAF and things like that, that's typically what we end up displacing, although most folks will try us behind their existing WAF and see how much that legacy WAF is actually missing, and then rip that legacy WAF entirely and use us globally to protect their apps.
Right. And Zane, what percentage of people actually keep their WAFs in place?
It's very rare. So when they try us, it's 85% of customers choose us over a competitor.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really, it's one of those where, and I've had a lot of vendors pitch me in my career, and it's always kind of the question of like, do they get you to buy the product before trying it, or are they excited for you to try the product? There's a reason why we're excited for folks to try the product, because it's F5 and Perva and Akamai are the big three that we really see folks ripping out and replacing with us, and it's 85% of folks displace those folks for us.
That's really awesome.
Can you speak a little bit to the technical details of how you guys are kind of operating and doing that? Like that seems pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's kind of, I'd say, 4 things that really differentiate us. Like if I'm taking the vendor hat off and just saying kind of as a CISO, like there were 4 things that I needed, and that really went into how and why we built Signal Sciences. And these 4 things are really what we consistently hear back from customers as to why they've used us so successfully. So number one is the architecture. So, in the legacy WAF world, they either gave you a physical appliance or they gave you a CDN. And, that kind of worked for the data center waterfall world where we only had a few apps and we only had a few technologies and things like that. But you speak to any enterprise today, and they've got apps in the data center, they've got apps in the cloud, they've got things going into containers, they've got microservices starting to appear, and you need one technology that can deploy everywhere across all of that while rolling up to one console, giving you one management plane, one policy enforcement point, all of these different pieces. So kind of one architecture that can go anywhere. That's point number one. Point number two is really the dirty secret of WAF, right? Which was WAF always broke your apps and your APIs with a million false positives. And you always had to deal with all the tuning, all the regex adjustments, all of these signatures and everything there. The crazy statistic that we get to share, that the funny thing is it's actually true, is that 95% of our customers are actually in full blocking mode. I mean, Paul, you can speak to that. I mean, you've used the product.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. And again, if you're trying to solve a problem like a vulnerable web application with something like regex, you have two problems.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. The one that we always hear back, it's funny, the one that we always hear back from customers really around the false positives and how we're able to actually do this stuff effectively is they really see us as we've done to legacy web app firewalls what CrowdStrike, Cylance, Carbon Black did to legacy AV. And it's actually very similar, right? You go from this signature and regex sort of old school model to a modern approach around both kind of behavior, but also just continuously getting smarter from a SaaS backend that can learn from across the entire customer base. And that's really our same model there as well. Obviously, the technology is completely different because we're focused on apps and APIs, not on endpoints. But really, the philosophy is the same. And what we always hear back from CISOs after they deploy us is like, oh, yeah, I ripped out my legacy AV for CrowdStrike or Cylance or Carbon Black, and I ripped out my legacy WAF for Signal Sciences. And so that's point number two.
Correct me if I'm, go ahead. On point number two, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not just about like, hey, I have this signature and I'm looking for this cross-site scripting attack. It's more like you're looking for one of the capabilities. You're looking for outliers. Like we saw these sessions come from this IP address and they're just way more than everyone else. Or like we saw this one weird request and that's the only time we ever saw that request. So you should probably look at that, right?
Exactly.
Am I getting that kind of like the gist of it?
No, you're nailing it, right? You go from this sort of signature model or regex model to a more of a behavior model or an outlier model or anything there. And that's exactly what we do. I mean, that came out of the fact that one of the biggest outages at Etsy at the time, where I was previously the CISO, was because we turned on our legacy WAF and turned it on into blocking mode. It broke the entire UK because it saw union select in the request, thought every request was SQL injection, but it was actually select the union jack flag because it was part of the UK checkout flow.
Oh my God.
And so, I mean, it really kind of set up this whole thing, right? Of like, the legacy approach to WAF is absurd. And if no one's going to build a better one, forget it. We are. Like,
yeah. All right. So you had two other points, right? You had
so that was point number one was architecture.
Hey,
hold on,
can I interject real quick?
Yeah.
It's hard to break in because you're so enthusiastic and talking so quickly. When you said 95% of, and I don't even remember it was of what, your audio kind of broke up. 95% of web applications are, could you repeat that?
Yeah, it's 95% of our customers are in full blocking mode with us.
Full blocking.
So unlike with WAF, where you always had it in monitor mode or you had one or two signatures turned on, with us, it's 95% of our customers in full blocking mode for their production apps.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. You may continue with your 2 points.
Glad to. So point number three was really getting that breadth of coverage. And this went back to that earlier point of, WAF sort of stuff isn't what keeps me up at night as a CISO. The SQL injection, the cross-site scripting, like that's not what really keeps me up at night, except for these internal apps suddenly being external facing with those. What really keeps me up at night is account takeover and credential stuffing, it's business logic abuse, it's API attacks and API security, needing advanced rate limiting sort of capabilities, malicious bots. It's all of these different pieces. So when earlier I was talking about, really giving coverage over layer 7, this is what I was alluding to, and this is what customers really use us for, is they're able to drop us in anywhere, turn us on in blocking mode, and then get that coverage over not just legacy WAF sort of issues like SQL injection and cross-site scripting, but coverage over account takeover, advanced rate limiting capabilities, malicious bots, business logic abuse, all of these different pieces.
And Zane, with those technologies that you just listed, are you looking at sessions or IP addresses, or are you tying the two together in the platform?
We're able to tie a lot of things together. This is where it gets really fun, is that everything that's in our platform we refer to as a signal, and you can arbitrarily mix and match signals, combine them in different ways, combine the output of those into different thresholds. So you might say, if I see a anomalous sort of login, and I only see 5 of them, maybe message my team in Slack. But if I see 20 of them, trigger a pagerduty alert. I want to make sure somebody sees it. And if I see 50 of them, block it outright until we figure out what's going on. And so you can do these escalating thresholds, as well as combining that with arbitrary signals across the board.
I think you had one more item to hit.
I did. I had one final point there, which is the integration with the rest of the toolchain. So integrating with Slack, integrating with Jira, PagerDuty, Datadog, and really for security operations folks, which is very near and dear to my heart, integrating with Splunk or Elk or any of the Sumo or Logarithm, any of the kind of modern or the legacy SIEMs, ArcSight, QRadar, anything like that, integrating directly and natively into those, so you can get that visibility through the rest of your tool chain, and you're not trying to fight a broken API or a non-existent API from a security vendor or a security tool there. That we provide full APIs for everything that's going on so that you're able to integrate it with the rest of your tools.
And you've teed this up very nicely, Zane. And Zane is very excited all the time whenever you talk to him. Even if he's taken 2 red eyes, he's still excited. So it's Zane's world and it's party time. When you're able to have these integrations and also able to be in blocking mode in almost every single one of your customers, it allows you to integrate with things like authentication, right? And do what you dubbed as continuous authentication, right? And we see a lot of vendors, both in the identity space and integrating with folks in the identity space, doing this, that based on behavior, we can ask the user to further prove their identity, basically.
Yeah.
Right? And so you're integrated with these technologies as well?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think this is, one of going to be the most kind of exciting things coming out over the next year or two across the industry. This isn't even Signal Sciences specific. But the notion of continuous authentication, and if you think about zero trust, which is certainly, a very hot buzzword, but what it really kind of means, if you strip away the vendor marketing, is we need a better way of authenticating, authorizing, and monitoring the usage of our critical applications. Right? And so for the zero trust sort of providers and vendors and everything there, where that's really started is at the beginning of that chain, right? And it's really, you see a lot of the providers saying, great, we're doing better device scanning and 2-factor auth and everything there to really do the kind of upfront authentication and authorization. Now, when you actually think about this holistically, that's kind of a point in time check, right? That's on the front door, but you're not watching what somebody does once they get in the house. And so I think the real future here is to have a system that can protect applications and APIs, feeding back into an identity system or a zero trust system to say, okay, great, you did that authentication and authorization check right up front, but now you've got a protection tool that's monitoring the app and API. And if someone starts doing some weird behavior in that, they're going to a sensitive page a dozen times when people only normally go once, or they did some little interesting, what kind of looks like an attack against some sensitive API or anything there, that system can feed back into the authentication and authorization system and say, hey, you probably want to do a step up in authentication or sign them out and reauthorize them, because they might have been fine at the front door, but once they got into the house or they got into the club, they were behaving completely different.
Right. And so Google does a great job of doing this when you log into stuff. I don't know how much of it. I've never seen an alert from Google once I'm logged into something, but certainly they're gating their login. If I log in from a different machine, from a different IP address, and I can kind of figure out like what's, and I know they're going to hate this, right? But you can kind of figure out what some of their algorithms are, right? Like based on your behavior that you observed. You're like, well, I know when I log in from like a new laptop, and like God forbid it's a new laptop from a different IP, like I got to do my password, my second factor, I got to get a text message and an email, like it's the whole thing. But like if it's just a new laptop, but it's also from an IP address that I've logged into before, like it may let me log in. It may ask me for my password again if the session was cached, but I also get an email. Like they're doing a good job of this from protecting the user's account, basically, right? But what you're saying goes even deeper than that. I want to see this. Well, hey, someone's logged in as Paul, and by the way, they just went in and tried to delete all the users in the G Suite account. Like, hold on, that's not something that normally happens, right?
Exactly. And now apply that principle across, put your CISO hat on and apply that across all of your enterprise apps. Because it's, Google is great on that, on doing that on the G Suite of technologies. But, G Suite's not going to be your massive risk point as an enterprise CISO. Right. It's going to be these million business apps that have no notion of it.
Zane, where was this technology for Twitter when they went, hold on, an internal employee just changed the Twitter accounts of our most popular users? Oops.
It's a real challenge, right? I think that you speak to any CISO and this is a real challenge for anyone. And I don't think anyone's had a silver bullet. And this is where I'm excited about technology like ours of protecting the apps and APIs, partnering with and kind of delivering some joint value with the zero trust folks and the identity folks. They've got a great front door story. We've got a great story on everything else. Let's bring these technologies together. And I think that can really push the industry forward on protecting this overall landscape.
So,
Doug, hold on, Doug Vinley.
So that actually, my question I had written down for you that you might have answered, but it's about the egress piece of it, because I have this personal like vendetta against egress, because so many clients that I talk to, egress is safe. There's never a problem. I mean, I know that today we're starting to see at the C-level type people starting to ask questions about things chattering and things internally. So I'm guessing this product can actually ascertain that those transactions that are going out and getting acts that are coming back and things like that, it's starting to evaluate that, because that's something where there's a massive neglect and it leads to all these IoT problems and all these other pieces when things are bouncing around through your network and then going out onto the internet and coming back in as acts. People just let that stuff come in wide open.
Yeah, that's interesting, Zane. In the platform, if my application starts to initiate connections, is that something you monitor?
Yeah, so you are speaking my language right there, because this is something that always drove me nuts as going way back when I was a pen tester a very long time ago. And you would go do either figure out a logic bug in the application, or back in the day, find a SQL injection or something like that. And you end up pulling down the whole user database, and you would expect that should set off some alarms, and it almost never did, right?
Well, they had DLP, but...
Yeah, great. If you tried to email it out as a spreadsheet, maybe that would call, sensitive users.xls,
so
maybe that would find it. But other than that. And so this is where we don't just focus in the Signal Sciences product. Like, we don't just focus on the attacks as they come in, but how is the application actually behaving? Right. So, hey, someone sends in a SQL injection and it results in a 404 for your application. Who cares? That's a day on the internet. Just let us take care of that for you. But if it suddenly triggers a response where it's triggering an error in the application and it does a dozen of those, and then suddenly the response size goes from 50K to 20 megs, like, hey, that should set off some alarms. And so this is where we can combine all those different signals up and say, great, if any attack ever triggers an error in the application or whatever's actually trying to egress back from the application, let's trigger some alarms real quick. Let's auto-file a priority 1 Jira ticket. Let's message the whole Slack team, the whole security operations team, or trigger a.
Can you push like a GPO off of that? So if you get something like an emotet that starts talking, and emotet says, "Hi, I'm here now. Give me all the goods." Can you trigger like a GPO block right there and just stop?
Yeah, so we can do arbitrary webhooks out to any sort of custom internal system like that, and we can you can pull all of these via the API. So any system that you've done, not just off the shelf stuff, but any kind of custom, all the scripts that we end up writing as custom glue to kind of put all the stuff together, you can interact with us via API, via webhooks, any way you want.
Hey, careful what you say about Emotet. I heard Tyler was one of the developers, so.
Yeah, that's what I keep hearing. It's one of the comments right at the top of Emotet. And it says, Tyler.
So I had a question.
Sorry, Tyler, I couldn't resist.
Lee had a question.
Lee.
So what I'm wondering is, I mean, we're talking about, taking this and protecting all our internet-facing stuff, and I'm thinking about in the past where a solution like that's coming. It's like, well, what the hell kind of footprint is that? I'm going to have to buy a boatload of stuff to do that, or what is your footprint?
Yeah, that is usually the first question that we get, right? Is kind of around architecture and performance and footprint and all of that. It's actually the reason why we work with the biggest video streaming and news and all the incredibly high volume and latency sensitive services on the internet. So what we've done there is really architected a system that avoids single point of failure. So one of the most common ways in which people deploy us is they deploy our agent on their infrastructure, and that shims into their application or API in a variety of ways. It could plug into the web server, it could plug into the app, it could plug into the container, it could be a reverse proxy, any of these, but it's built in a way that's really focused around performance, latency, and reliability, so that even if anything ever breaks with our system, your system doesn't go down. And so it allows for, there's no single point of failure there, so that even if something broke, which on this side of things is never broken, even if it did, it wouldn't take down your infrastructure or your customers' interaction with your applications. And then the other way in which folks commonly deploy us is what we call Cloud WAF, basically. And that's a CDN style deployment where you just make a DNS change. So you don't deploy anything on your infrastructure. If you're like, look, I'm allergic to agents, I don't want to deploy another agent for the rest of my life, but I want to protect all my apps. Great, you just make a DNS change, you don't deploy a single thing, and you're able to protect all of your applications that way. Again, with the real focus on latency, performance, reliability, because those are exactly the folks that we work with. I mean, it's the biggest names in the world on that.
So once again, I don't get to deploy a whole rack of new shiny hardware. Damn it.
Damn it.
Hey, no, I'm still excited to bring some 2Us back, but it seems nobody else is.
Yeah.
All right.
It sounds too easy, actually.
Okay, Jeff's waving.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm not waving. I simply have my hand up. I got PCI questions. I'm ready.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wait.
You were signing earlier. I think you spelled something nasty when you.
Yeah, you didn't pick up on that.
I'm ready.
A couple questions for you, Zane. First, hopefully this is a softball question, but are you aware of how Signal Sciences plays with PCI? Meaning, do you meet any particular PCI requirements?
Yes, we do. So we check that. I mean, that's actually a straightforward one for us. Is we check that PCI compliance box for our customers. Around 6.6 and around WAF requirements and everything there, we're able to make them PCI compliant from that component. By the way, any question that starts with holding up a bottle of bourbon, you've got my attention, my friend.
All right, well, I'm going to hold it up again. I got another question.
All right.
When they're PCI related, that's a requirement.
Exactly.
It is a requirement. Lee sort of asked the question, or you answered one of my questions indirectly in answering Lee's question. I was curious as to how Signal Sciences works in a cloud containerized Kubernetes environment, but you've addressed that already. A hypothetical PCI question.
Sure.
It's very common in the PCI world where you've got a merchant that has an e-commerce server. So you've got a company that's selling something on the web.
Oh, yes.
One of the very common practices is to find a hosting provider that will eliminate the burden of PCI by taking over all the hosting of your application for you, and take care of what's typically a yet another company that does the actual payment page, the checkout. Right. They're typically called a payment gateway or a payment provider. They might even be the acquiring bank themselves. Right. Companies like Stripe, I think, is an example of one.
Sure.
My question is, in that type of scenario where you've got a merchant dealing with a hosting provider that in turn is dealing with a payment gateway or processor. Who are you selling your product to at that point?
Basically every stage of that. We have customers at every stage of that. I mean, what you see is a lot of folks use us behind the scenes on the financial services side. So certainly acquiring bank, like merchant, like a lot of, we have a tremendous customer set in both of those spaces. But then the actual, kind of merchant here who put it to, who moved their infrastructure to some hosting provider who says we magically solve PCI. A lot of times, what you realize is nothing's magic on that. And actually, they're not really protecting your apps. They're not really protecting your APIs. So we see a bunch of those sort of e-commerce folks use us with the cloud WAF style deployment where they don't need to do anything with the infrastructure. They just put us in front of that and they're able to actually protect their services in a way where it's very effective for them on that. And they're not reliant on what, behind the scenes is mod security with 2 rules turned on.
Last question, and this is, I feel bad. I'm giving you really softball questions, but partially it's because you're on the ball.
You're on the questions, Jeff.
And you ask and you understand PCI, at least for how you play in it, which is very refreshing, actually. Thank you.
Fantastic.
You referenced PCI 6.6, which for our listening audience that may or may not be familiar with PCI is a requirement to basically protect public-facing web-based applications. And 6.6 actually gives you the option of doing either a web application firewall to protect your web application or doing periodic web application testing. So my question to you is, given that you're an alternative and a much more functional alternative to a WAF, what are the advantages, disadvantages, not between you, Signal Sciences, and a WAF, but Signal Sciences as opposed to doing periodic web application testing? Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure this will drive my salespeople insane, but I'll answer from a pure practitioner perspective, which is, I think what we all think here is one security control shouldn't replace a whole other security control, right? The entire idea of defense in depth is you want to do these multiple layers, assuming one layer is not going to be as successful as you hoped. So there's certainly no world in which I stand up here as a practitioner and say with an honest face, oh, if you use our product, you shouldn't do anything else for security. Like, absolutely not, right? You should do scanning. You should do assessments. I'm
glad to hear you say that, Zane, because we'd laugh you off the show if you said that. Yeah. You know that already.
As you should. Right? As you should. Right? You should continue to do these things and do assessments on that. What we find is that virtually every one of our customers does all of these things, right? Just because you have a method, you have a modern WAF like us, and you're protecting your apps, protecting your APIs, it doesn't mean you stop pen testing them or you stop scanning them.
But what's interesting, Zane, is I think, 10, 15 years ago, let's say, you had an application, right? And you could say, well, I'm going to try and attack it and scan it, and I'm going to try and protect it with a WAF. When we fast forward to today, I think about all the points in our SDLC or a CI/CD pipeline where I have to do some level of scanning or checking, right? I've got software composition analysis. I've got just build it in containers and test it for functional testing, test it for security, testing my own build and deployment pipeline. Because what I've also realized is we have this compounding problem of my app is not just one app, it's 30 or 100 or 1,000. By the way, I also have these other apps that are helping the continuous integration and deployment of my app as well. Some of those I may have custom code and that also needs to be. So I've got apps that are supporting my app. So you absolutely, and Zane, I think this is the conversation we had earlier. And look, I'll be frank, and they're both sponsors, right? I would have NetSparker and or Acunetics doing my scanning, and I would have a Signal Sciences protecting it at runtime, right? Yeah. And again, they're sponsors of the show, but take that away for a moment, and Zane and I will speak not as representatives of our companies, right?
Right.
You need something that's going to scan and detect vulnerabilities. You need a DAST system and probably other systems, and you need something protecting your apps at runtime, right? Would you agree with that statement wholeheartedly, Zane?
Exactly, right? I think if you really think about this, DAST, SAST, all the sort of bug discovery mechanisms, if you're only relying on those, what you're betting on, that I don't think any of us would take this bet, is you're betting you can discover every bug in that application and that no attacker will ever discover any bug that you didn't find. And I don't know a security person on the planet who would take that bet. And
I don't know a developer on the planet that would
exactly.
commit to,
No way.
I can unit test and find all the bugs in my own code. Like a developer that says that, right, is either completely insane or they're lying or both. Right?
Ego man.
There is just no way. There is no way. Anyone's ever read any piece of code in their entire life can never
Good
say
luck
someone
with
else is
that.
going to use it and not find a bug.
Good
like
luck
no
with
way.
that.
Paul,
Totally,
I need you to fix all the bugs, known and unknown. Please.
Right?
And assume the liability for them.
And we try. As developers, we certainly try, right? But there's always those, like essentially a lot of the security bugs are basically scenarios that you didn't consider, right?
Yeah,
and so that could be a functional bug or that could be a security bug. And a lot of times there's a lot of overlap between the two, right?
What's the learning time on this, Zane? So if I write a new app, so this afternoon we sat down and Paul and I crank out a new module and we put it online.
Can we do that someday? That
hell yeah.
That sounds like fun.
Porn scrapers. Yeah. But
Something.
But whatever we write and we put it out there, what is the time horizon on this before that baseline smooths back out again? So that if this thing lights up and says, "Oh, here's this new thing," it's talking like crazy, it's alert, alert, alert. How long before that curve starts to collapse and we go, "Oh, that's normal, that's normal, that's normal"?
That's a good question.
Super good question. So what we typically see, right? And let's talk about the historical piece first. Historically, with like a WAF in learning mode, you were talking about months, right? In the best case,
if ever.
Yeah, if ever. The reality was you never actually put it in blocking mode in prod. Or you did like 1 or 2 CVE rules or something like that. But that
or you go in and whitelist it.
Yeah, exactly. What we actually see, and take this for everyone listening, take this with a pinch of salt. I wouldn't believe this if I saw some vendor on a podcast talking about this, but it actually is true. That we see customers go into blocking mode in production in hours if they want to be. Okay. We don't see that we don't usually see that because the reality is it's not actually the technology. It's that they're ready to go in minutes or hours. And I'll talk about why in just a second, because I think that's critical. But everyone has been so burned by legacy WAFs that you want to give it time to bake, right? Yeah. And so what we typically see in the enterprise is people will leave us in non-blocking mode for about a week or 2 weeks, or sometimes a month or 2 months, just because they want to feel extremely comfortable before they flip that switch. Mm-hmm. And the reason that they all end up flipping that switch and why we get that 95% in blocking mode and why some of them flip the switch in minutes or hours is because we're not a black box. We show everything that goes into the blocking decisions. So when you're in non-blocking mode, you can see exactly what we detected, exactly what we would have blocked, how we made the decision. So it's not that kind of, flip the switch and just pray that you're not going to break the apps. It's you see exactly what we would have blocked, how we would have blocked it, what we detected. And so you can, you let that bake for a week and you see all the decisions and you review them. And typically what folks do is they do it for a week. They see the decisions we reached and they say, okay, these are actually all legitimate. I never thought I'd say that about a WAF. And we can actually go into blocking mode.
I'd argue, Zane, that, well, here's my take on it with my own code. I've caused more production outages than Signal Sciences. Like a lot more. And I think a lot of developers may possibly admit the same thing.
Yeah, we've pretty much all done that.
And when you're not breaking things, you're putting out Twitter posts that are missing things that are
yes, screwing up the social media. There's a fix coming for that as well.
So one last question. You said that you utilize the data across multiple clients in order to kind of build the heuristic anomaly detection. What do you guys do to kind of anonymize that data and really secure each one of those customers? Analytics, more or less.
Oh yeah, completely. So we did basically as we were building our very initial architecture on day one, we all sat down as security leaders and said, myself and my co-founders, and said, what is a architecture that we ourselves would approve in our environment? And so what we did on that is really all the sensitive data, like all the PII, all the sensitive stuff, it never even comes to the cloud backend in the first place. it all stays local inside the customer environment there. And then what goes to the back end is like anonymized, redacted, redacted metadata, which then we can anonymize and do across the customer set there. So that there's never any sensitive data even leaving your environment. And then we built a really, as time constraints, I won't go through the full thing, but we built a really deep dive privacy model around this of where all the redactions apply locally on your side. So nothing sensitive is ever leaving your environment. And then you have full control over those redactions and ability to verify that everything is running as intended on that. So we solved the problem kind of in a simple sense, in the sense that the sensitive data never comes to the back end in the first place. So you don't have to worry about any of those really scary problems that you would have to if the sensitive data was in the cloud back end. All the sensitive data stays on the customer side, and it's only metadata and redacted metadata that comes to the back end.
Zane, as many of us push towards using cloud native services, how can I use Signal Sciences to start helping me protect and make sure I'm not making mistakes or succumbing to an attack when, look, in our own application, right, I'm starting to utilize S3, Amazon, AWS media services, queuing systems, right? Like, and I think this is pretty common and more and more so today, right, where I didn't develop the app in the cloud, but now I've got it in the cloud and now I'm starting to peel off all these pieces. So I have to write less code, basically, right? And how does Signal Sciences help me with that transition?
Yeah, this transition really from, if you put your attacker hat on, this is kind of the completion of the transition from, SQL injection and bugs like that really impacted us all so much 10, 15 years ago, and really moving up to kind of the business logic and the account takeover and the abuse like that. And that's really where we see customers get so excited when they try us out, is the realization that they're able to cover not just the legacy WAF stuff, but all these other pieces. And they're able to do it in a way that plays in that cloud native architecture really well. So if they're using containers, we either bake into the container natively or plug in as a sidecar, whichever one they want. If they're doing full EC2, great, you can put us, bake us in with Ansible or Chef or Salt or any of the sort of configuration management pieces. Or you're doing a gold image, great, you just bake us in with that. And it really built very heavily around automation so that it plays very well with the kind of cloud stack that you see of emerging cloud applications, but also still playing very well with the lift and shift, right? Which is, for a bunch of the enterprise, that's how we get there, right? We lift and shift to the cloud, and then you decompose down into these more modern services. Right. And so that's exactly what we see, is the architecture is flexible enough to support not just the really brand new things, but the lift and shift and the stuff that's still in the data center as well. Yeah,
like CloudFront, do you have like customers that are using CloudFront and putting Signal Sciences in front of CloudFront, right?
Exactly.
And that's just like a proxy in front of CloudFront?
Yeah, that's where we do the CDN style deployment. That's where we do the Cloud WAF deployment. And what's nice about that is you can use that Cloud WAF deployment with any CDN. So if you want to use CloudFront, you want to use, Fastly, you want to use Cloudflare, Akamai, it doesn't matter.
Well, I want to use CloudFront
because across all of them.
They're given like 12 months free or something when you sign up for CloudFront.
Oh, fun.
There's some like thing going on right now where you get like a year free. And even at that, the charges are pretty minimal. So. Oh,
completely. And what we see is that enterprise will use one in the cloud. They'll use one for their data center app. Different business units will use different CDNs. And so they're able to, rather than have a different piece of security technology inside each CDN, they're able to use us across everything.
Yeah, that's awesome. See that? I was trying to stump you too.
No, it was a good one, man. It's a very good one.
That's awesome. It's awesome. More questions for Zane?
I want to follow back up on my question because I'm not satisfied with your answer, Zane. 6.6.
Fantastic.
To restate the question, the requirement is an either or for customers to do some sort of web application vulnerability scanning, testing, or do something like a WAF. Many of the customers I have, they want to spend very little, do very little, just get by. That's another story. If you had to pick one, why pick a Signal Sciences type of solution over doing the other testing? Granted, it's better to do both,
Certainly.
But many customers are going to pick one or the other. Why should I go your route rather than?
I think we should rewrite PCI so that it's an and not an or. That's
I'm with you on that.
really
I'm much more for the security angle here of let's rewrite it to do both. But I hear you, right? I see plenty of customers that do exactly this, and why they choose us actually goes back to what Paul and I talked about, which is you're scanning for bugs in a lot of places in your code, right? And scanning one more time somewhere else versus protecting those actual applications and APIs, you've got a lot of opportunities to scan for bugs. You've only got one spot to actually protect your production apps and APIs. And so that's why I'm not going to sit here and tell you must do that, but I'll share with you why we see customers choose us over a scanner when they're only trying to do one of them, is because they want to actually protect those apps and APIs, not try one more way of finding bugs. Because guess what? At the end of the day, your attacker is going to find some different one than what your scanner actually found.
Right.
That's just crazy talk.
Zane, I know you do a lot of advising and some investing. What's the number one thing you look for in the founders or the company when you advise and or invest?
Oh, by far and away, it's number one thing. It's have they been practitioners?
Yeah.
I think the security vendor landscape is a million vendors who want to talk about the new shiny thing but have no idea how to solve it or the problems we actually face as security practitioners. I want my security vendors to have been practitioners and they got so fed up that they wanted to go solve the problem here on this.
Great answer. Yeah. Zane Lackey, thank you very much for appearing on Paul
Thank you for having me on, you guys. It's great to see you.
SecurityWeekly.com/Signal Sciences. Check them out. With that, we'll take a short break and come back with our friend Sumedh from Qualys. Stay tuned.
Thanks, everyone.